Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Isn't it nice to be in God's house again and hear what He has to say to us? Our weeks are long and drawn out and full of frustrations, but there is a place that God has provided for us. That place is here on the Sabbath day. As a matter of fact, Jesus said the Sabbath was made for man. And so we are to find this day and worship God fully and firmly and convincingly, knowing that we are doing the right thing. Now, God has given us His Word, and His Word is full of stories aplenty. I love the Bible, as I'm sure you do, and find it rewarding, revealing, and refreshing. It's such a fountain of abundance. We can go to it and find just about what we need. There is a story that takes the entire book up to tell this one story. And in the light of what's happening today in the Middle East, we need to be careful, we need to be observant, yes, we need to be aware. You know what's happening in Israel? You know the intent of the neighboring nations? Their objective is to drive, as they call it, the Jews into the sea. There is a connection, brethren, between us and Israel. A great connection. And many people get sort of annoyed when they think, why we have to always talk about Israel and the Jews. Our identity is not with the Philippines or the Philistines. The Philistines. Our identity is with Israel. And we need to be proud of that. Because the children of Israel laid a basis on which we run. Jesus came continuing the story of Israel. Let us therefore remember, brethren, that that's where our identity lies. They are presently trying to throw Israel out of where? Israel. I was talking to a guy once, and he was saying, they have the right over there. They came from Europe, and all the hash that you've heard 1,000 times. I said, if those people are not Israel or Israelites, would somebody change the name to something else? That's the name. God said, I would take you to the land of Canaan. There's a lot there, brethren. And I think the reason why there is such rancor, detestation, and hatred for the Jews is the reason they identify them with Israel. Does that sound confusing? Israel, the Jews, Israelites. Therein lies the secret for the existence of God's church. Because we know the truth of Israel. If you don't, you need to seek to find out. There is a tie, there is a continuity. And if we lose that, we could very well lose our salvation. And I'm not saying that lightly. If our focus is not in the right place, we could be misguided. There was another time when the Jews were definitely hated. And we in our lingo need to get the understanding between the Jews and the Israelites. Nearly every time I speak, I like to make this difference abundantly clear. It's funny that the Jews are living in Israel. We speak about the Jews, and we say, well, Israel. And the confusion is abundant. But if you understand and see where we are coming from in God's church, because there is a tie-in, you understand what God intends for us to understand. There was another time when the Jews were the focal point of anger. Was there ever a time they were not? And their destiny, their existence was at stake. It was in a place called Shushan. Shushan was one of the areas where King Ahasuerus, funny name to call, was king. This book of Esther brings to bear several very important things. Did you know that it deals with women's rights in here? To make a quick story, the king had a banquet. He was a world-known king, and he invited all his great guys and their wives to come and have food with him, and they did. When the banquet that lasted for several days was done, he, realizing how beautiful his wife was, how distinct she was, thought he would send for her so that these other kings, not that they hadn't seen her before, would get a good look at her. She, by that time, from all the banquets, had gone to her quarters and had made herself ready for the evening. Consequently, she refused to come. What? Refused the king? You're his wife? That's where the women's rights issues came up. And the king's men said, how dare you let your wife defy you like that? Command that she comes into your presence. Ha! She similarly refused. They conferred and said, well, there's nothing else we can do but get rid of this queen. She's not fulfilling her queenly duties. This one instance, mind you. Sometimes no matter how good your wife is, one thing and you feel, gotta get rid of her. You don't compile all the things that she embodies. You get mad, and the king did. His counselors told him, well, you know what? We gotta get rid of this woman. All of a sudden, she's not the queen anymore, she's this woman. And many times when men get angry, they forget the endearing person they have at their side. And she becomes this woman. I tell you, this woman. This has been going on for years. What did Adam say? The woman that thou gavest me, she made me eat. So the accusation and the condemnation and the removing of one's self from his spouse goes back a long way. So much in the story, I wish I had time. So they went about to get a new queen. Easy like that. They forgot the lineage of the queen. You remember Princess Diana not having royal background, yet she became the princess, and so on and so on. So there was one Mordecai who was with the Jews that had fled the dispersion, the separation, the removal, and he said, wait a minute, my brother's little daughter is pretty. Let me enter her in this competition to be queen. He knew his lineage. She knew hers. But he made sure not to let the competition for the prince or for the queen know what and who she was. Wasn't deceptive. You know, sometimes you can hold truth and not declare it. When others feel, yeah, you better tell them who you are. You belong to God's church. At times you need to bite your tongue, keep quiet, and wait for the right time. To make a short story long, I know it's a long story short, but to make it long, she was entered into the competition to be chosen to be queen. And would you believe, she had all the things done for the young woman that was necessary to become queen. And guess what? She was chosen. There are three words I want to mention this morning, and they apply as they did to Esther, to us. The first one, she was chosen. Does that sound like us? John 15:16, you have not chosen me, but I have chosen you. Who said that? Jesus Christ. Brethren, when you feel in the dumps, maybe like this past week was for you, when you feel forsaken, forlorn, out of it, what am I doing? Is this still God's church? Remember, you did not choose yourself. You were chosen by God. God brought you here. This is one church you don't join. You didn't join God's church. You were here because of a lot of converging circumstances, and God brought you here. Bear that in mind. When you're tempted to flounce off and walk away and get annoyed and throw everything through the window, this is not it. How many people have left God's church with that attitude? Well, this is not God's church. If this were God's church, it would have loved me. Brethren, John 15:16 says, we have been chosen by God to be here, to be in his church, to be submissive to his will, to his law, to his commandments. We, like Esther, have been chosen. So, chosen is one of the first words. There are two others to go. The competition was roaring. All the girls were pretty. They all were vying for that singular position. But she was the one chosen. Not only was she chosen, the girl chosen to become queen had to be specially, here's the second word, called. How many times have I spoken from this podium about the vital necessity of a calling? You ought to check your story. Not only have you been chosen, you've been called. God has called you to be a part of his family. That's why I said before, you didn't join the church. God called you. Think of your circumstances. You read a book, a friend mentioned it to you, and you came. Yes. That was in response to a calling. In the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 26, we find the same words being used. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 26. For you see your calling, brethren, your calling. You didn't just come to these special lectures. God was calling you. And if you look back in your life, you can see, oh, that's how come I'm here. I see. That's why I dress myself on a Sabbath morning and come here, because I am under the special calling of God, and I must respond. Well, I can stay home and watch the broadcast. I don't have to come and take all those buses and trains. And do you do that for work? Take buses and trains and walk? But to fulfill your calling by coming here because you think, oh, it's too much duress. I could, there's a church right outside here. My wife was telling me when the Worldwide Church of God split. There were several people, of course, who went various ways. And one woman had called them and said, now where's the church? And she said, well, we are such and such a place. And she didn't want to go that far. And she said, you know what, there's a church right out here next to me. I will go there. If you don't know by now, oh, that's the lyric of a song. If you don't know by now. If you don't know by now that here is where God's Spirit dwells. You ought to be here on a Sabbath morning. You ought to dress yourself and come here, but I feel so tired. Last night my wife and I were at a doctor's office because I've had pains in my back. My responsibility is here, not only to speak, but to be in attendance. My wife and I never said, well, let's not go in this morning. This is, tight. Had a hard week, let's stay in. Let's stay in. No, we come. When we miss the service, we are either in Jamaica or some other place. But you ought to be here. Here is where you belong. If you call yourself a member of God's church, here is where you ought to be. But I just went to visit this other church because my friends are over there. I'm not angry. I'm just lifting my voice. Sincere strength to make you understand. If you've been called, you weren't called to be a Pentecostal. Not throwing names. You were called to be a part of the church of God. And God's church is distinct, different. And you ought to know that. She was chosen. She was called. And eventually, she was crowned. She became the queen in Persia, in Shushan. Are you saying I'm going to be crowned, Mr. Morris? God is making of us kings and queens. And if you don't think you're a candidate to become a queen or a king, forget it. But you are. You remember the stirring words of St. Paul? He was in a prison, crowned. Moses in the desert, fighting scorpions and lizards, and I mean a crown. I don't see any crown in my future. What did they say? It's always darkest before dawn. What did the psalmist say? Weeping may endure for a night, good through bitter times, and you feel, the heavens are brass. My children have all forsaken me. And you feel, well, this sojourn was a waste of time. I'd never get a crown. Do I need a crown? I can live without a crown. And we start denying what's promised to us. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. Paul in prison, getting ready to lose his life, getting ready to be beheaded, getting ready to bring his ministry to an end. And you're saying, well, is it worth it? Here's what he says: I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. And those divisions are important for you to do. Strive to keep the faith. Strive to finish your course. Strive to get that prize at the end of the course. Verse 8. Henceforth, there is laid up for me a crown. Oh, there is where that word crown comes in. A crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give to me in that day, and not to me only, but to all them that love his appearing. More material, but time is eaten away and eroded my time. So, brethren, like Esther, we have been chosen, we have been called, and we await that crown. It's there. A crown for you is polished and shining, shimmering and waiting. We don't have to bring death on right away, but at the end of this life, God has promised us a crown of life. You know, the one we read in when we gave that sermon on the kingdom, Revelation 5. Let's throw another one in here. Mr. Davis is not around. You wouldn't know I read more than 3 scriptures. Revelation 5. Uh-oh, I see him back there. Revelation 5, verses 9 and 10. And they sang a new song saying, worthy, thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seal thereof, for you were slain and have redeemed us unto God out of every kindred, that's us, we've come from everywhere, and every tongue and every people and all nations. Verse 10. And has made us unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign in heaven. No, on the earth. That's where the kingdom of God is going to be established. That's where it's being built even now. Let us therefore, brethren, remember those 3 C's: called, chosen, and crowned.